and a longtime resident of the Philadelphia community. When the church started 153 years ago, it was on my husband's family land down Old Bobeth Mars Sasser Road. But we're very pleased that you have joined us tonight. Philadelphia was asked, because of this room and the size of it, if we would be able to have this meeting in this room, and we agreed. Guys, I don't know if anybody in here remembers, but there was a time in history when a community wanted to give their people, their citizens, information. It was usually done at the church, because that was a big enough place for people to congregate and to meet. Tonight is no exception. Tonight, the purpose of this meeting is this: to give you information and to answer your questions. We have no predetermined course of action other than we're going to remember that this is God's house. And I'll give you a plug, too, from a church. We have another service at 10:30. We have a 9 and a 10:30 in the sanctuary, but we also have a 10:30 here. And it is set up just like this. It's a little more casual, and God has blessed. Now, Andrew Barber, the minister who preaches here on Sunday morning in this service, he'd be jealous of this crowd. Okay? So he'll feel good that I invited you. Anytime you have a spare Sunday, 10:30, and you want to try Faith Hall, we'd love to have you. Of course, for Brother Philip's sake, I'll say also the sanctuary. Okay? But we are blessed by your presence here. We are blessed by this room. God has used it in a multitude of ways, and He continues to bless Philadelphia Baptist Church in a multitude of ways. I'd like for us to get started tonight, opening with a prayer. So if you'll bow your heads. Dear most gracious Heavenly Father, when you created this earth, you looked at all that you created and said it is good. And then you gave it to us to be the caretakers. Father, we just pray for wisdom tonight. We pray for listening, compassion. We pray for knowledge. We pray for guidance. God, we love you, and we thank you so much for loving us. We believe we live in the best place in the state of Louisiana and in the United States of America. And we thank you for our homes and for this community. We thank you for the number of people here. We ask that you watch over them. You care for them as they leave here after our meeting and head to their homes. And you keep them safe. Father, for all that you've done and for all that you're going to do, we thank you. Amen. I'm going to turn it over to Melody Slocum, who has been the organizer here and responsible for putting this together. And if she's still at that door, nope, she's here. We had somewhat of a communication faux pas. That door was supposed to be unlocked at 5:30, but I will deal with that tomorrow. Here you go.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you again from the bottom of my heart. And I'm proud that we were blessed enough that the church agreed to allow us to come together. And I won't take a lot of time because we have some awesome speakers. And I know you're going to be quite informed and you're going to have a lot of questions after that for them. But I did want to talk about a couple of little things. And one of those things is basically, why are we having the meeting now? Why during the legislative season? And so it's a pretty simple answer to that. So as we were going through this thing, the community was facing more and more concerns of it. And, we called around and tried to get some information as we could. And, we were really just met with nothing. We weren't told anything. A lot of people were avoiding us. Some of it was just hostile. And so as we actually made one call to our Holy Street president, Mr. Craig Smith, and he was extremely gracious and kind and basically said, yes, let's get a meeting together. I will do it. I will pull that meeting together for the community. And he said, as soon as I can secure a location, I am willing to do that, and I want to do that. So I really appreciate Craig. I don't know where he's at, but I know that he is interested in the voice of the community, and I appreciate that. But anyway, that being said, as we began to talk to people, they started getting really anxious. They were hearing all kinds of things out there, not knowing what was truth and what wasn't. So it became obvious to us we really couldn't wait. So the legislature is in the state right now making decisions right now. In fact, they have been for 2 years that set this whole thing in motion, set the wheels to turning. So it's important that we make some knowledgeable decisions right now. Our legislators need to hear our opinions and how we feel about things. We need to know what's going on. And basically, I will just tell you, there has been 2 years of preparation for someone to call a public meeting. I found out about this 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know about you. I still don't know a lot about it, but I do know that it's, they're planning, if nothing stops it, it will be here at International Paper Company. So that being said, that's why we called Philadelphia Church. I happen to be a member of it, and they graciously said, let's look on our calendar and see what we can do. Well, guess what? They are a very active facility, and they have a lot going on. So this was the day, this was the time. That's the simple reason to why today and why now. So I want to also let me see. I have to have notes. I'm not that good, y'all. So, just saying that there has been no public meetings. No one's called it, not our local officials and not a gas company. No one has called a public meeting to identify and tell us what's going on. And they've had 2 years, so I think they've had time. And I believe that we've made the choice on our own to, let's just take it on our own. Nobody's going to tell us what's going on. So anyway, we are not here to point the blame. We are here to get answers. We're here to listen, to learn, and to educate ourselves from what we know has happened in other areas and how it was handled, and what, if anything, is being done or can be done at this point. Based upon first-hand accounts from Mississippi, Iowa, and even now Texas, they all say that they come in like a Roy freight train and they just roll right over them. Well, they're not going to roll right over us. We're going to know what's happening, and we're going to at least stand up and say how we feel about it, whatever that might be. So let's talk about the gas and oil pipeline company that wants to come in to the old International Paper site and build a carbon capture and or injection site to pump this toxic carbon under our feet all across Rapides and other parishes. You're going to hear some things. They're going to say, oh, it's 2 years away. Or maybe some may say it's not even coming here at all. Know this, our state has already put and setting in place an unbelievable plan to fast-track all permits, giving the public little or no time to respond or react. Multiple permits for injection sites have already been applied for, including one on Castor Plunge Road in Woodworth. So you're going to hear, they're going to put better regulations in place. Ask yourself this, if it is so safe to capture carbon and store it, if it's so safe to put it in our grounds, why don't they capture it and store it at the same place? There's a reason for all of this, and I know that these fellows that are much more knowledgeable than I are going to answer that question. But I do know this, that they will get paid by the number of pipelines and the length in which they go to transport this stuff. That's one of the many ways that they are paid. So, and then there's another thing about this Northwestern Parish pipeline proposal, where they take the carbon that's up there and they, through this massive web of pipelines, transport it down to us and store it under our feet. I have a problem with that, so let's see if we can figure out what might happen with that. The Synod Hub, we're slated to be the largest in the United States. They don't want it under their ground, and my thought is the reason they don't want it is because they already have revenue coming from their oil and gas, companies up there. They're getting great revenue off of their oil and gas, and if they put this carbon in the ground under them, that messes up their deal with their mineral rights. Well, what about our mineral rights, What about the future of the potential that we have to the mineral rights under our ground? Those are questions that we need answers to. Those are questions I want answers to. Hunters, fishermen, farmers, what will this do to your futures? With all the chaos going on in Congress, can we really afford to blindly trust government to represent us? And the next thing we hear is it's too late, it's already been done. So I'm glad that you're coming out and just trying to find out some stuff about this. But we do need to be prepared for big money oil and gas to partner with our local schools soon in another effort to buy public favor. So don't forget that the state just passed a law allowing pipelines to go within 500 feet of your school. Do you agree with that law? Does that sound like they are protecting your children? Keep in mind also, this is a billionaire-owned company. They are highly motivated to get federal and European tax credits, and you are standing in the way. They will tell you they plan to bring in a geologist from LSU to do a report. Seriously, a state-paid geologist. So I would prefer to take my information from an independent, unbiased geologist who doesn't have any hidden agenda. You know, we know little to nothing about the water that this operation will require or consume, but we have heard it will be in excess of 1 million gallons a day. And then we don't have any idea that if there were an injection site and a leak, what that would mean to the health of our community. Look, if there's any blame here, it will be on us. It is our responsibility to be informed and communicate with our local, state, and federal elected people. How can they be expected to represent us if they do not know how we feel? This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It is a greed issue. It is a big money greed issue where the rich get richer and the average person takes all the risk. Understand this, there's no benefit. Sure, they're going to dangle a few jobs. We don't even know how many that'll be. But they're going to dangle that over our community because they know that we need jobs. We are desperate for jobs. We want to support our schools. But we have got to stay focused and remember what's most important. You know, our families, a lot of ours have been here a long time. And, you know, even if you're just recent to the area, you work hard for what you've got. The land under your feet, you should have a say-so. You shouldn't have anyone, you know, demanding. And that's another thing. Right now in the state legislature, they're voting. They already voted yesterday on a Sunday about the issue regarding eminent domain. So I'm just telling you, the wheels are in motion. So this is not a service or a utility. It's a private industry that offers no service, no benefit to us. There is great risk and very little benefit. And I just want to wrap it up by saying this. You know, in politics, there's a saying that if you don't have a seat at the table, you are on the menu. Well, guess what? Guess what? Big money, they have a seat at the table, and we are on the menu. Now, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget your name. She's with the CO2 Alliance. Renee Savant. Sure, I was thinking that, yeah, Mr. Brad, I'm going to just let you introduce yourself, okay? I'm sorry, I was thinking you were going to introduce. And also to say there will be a question and answer immediately following Mr. LeBlanc. Can you let them know who you are?
Can't hear you.
Okay, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Melody, that was great. A great introduction. There's so much going on at the state, it's hard for us all to keep up with it. I think that it's good that you're here because we definitely need community support to get this thing rolling. There seems to be one item missing here, but let me just, here it is. If I plug this in, Josh, is this going to interfere with you? No? Okay. All right, so just a quick introduction into who I am and why I'm here, other than just legacy lawsuits that will affect the oil and gas exploration business. I know the other side thinks that they can get along with us, but I'm here to tell you that I think it's an impossibility. I'm going to start off with a film just to show you what CO2 can do when it ruptures from a pipeline. This was in Sartarsha, Mississippi. Let's see if I can get it to...
In 2020, a pipeline carrying carbon dioxide ruptured in Mississippi. The plume of toxic waste forced hundreds to evacuate and sent 50 people to the hospital with dizziness, seizures, some even foaming at the mouth. First responders said it was like a zombie movie.
And number one, she's laying on the ground and she's shaking. She's kind of drooling out of her mouth. I don't know if she's having a seizure or not. Tell me exactly what had happened. Like, I was driving and I ran into like a lot of fumes, like there's a lot of noise going on. Because I know if any of you are going to explode,
me and my brothers and my first cousin, we decided to, just take a day and go fishing. We went up there and we fished, had a nice time. And we were on our way back. And around about 7 o'clock, I saw a big explosion. I was there when it happened. It actually just, boom, big cloud of smoke went up in the air. And I called my mother immediately. And I told her, I said, Mama, this pipeline blew up down here. We on our way to come get y'all. And by the time we turned on Prairie Creek Road off number 3, the car just shut off and went dead. We woke up at the hospital.
So you passed out at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we have also with us, we have Thelma Brown, and Thelma is Deanna's mother?
Yes.
Okay, and Thelma, tell us what about that phone call and what you were doing when it came and what happened.
I sure will. When they didn't come, I just got in the room and I thought about it. I said, let me get me a towel and we'll close up in one room. And people were calling me, telling me I had to get out. We got to get out. Some was saying stay, some was saying go. It was just like chaos all around me.
But you couldn't go away.
I couldn't go.
Why?
I had a flat on my car.
Okay.
I had a flat.
You were trapped.
I was trapped.
Okay.
At that moment.
And these were grandchildren.
These was grandbabies.
And the youngest was how
He
old?
was about 4 months at that time.
Okay, and the other two were a little bit older.
Yes.
And one of them had asthma?
Yes.
And that started getting a lot worse?
Both of them had asthma, and the little girl, she even had it more now since this explosion.
Went to bed, basically, with the kids and,
Yes.
and gave it up.
I gave it up.
Yeah.
Whatever would be, would be.
You couldn't get out.
No.
Over the weekend, dozens become sick and even more had to leave their homes after a gas leak and explosion in Yazoo County. Around 300 residents evacuate their carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide that leaked into the air after the incident near Sartarsha.
I think the leak happened, or the rupture happened somewhere around 7 o'clock that night. The company didn't call in until somewhere around closer to 8 to say, hey, we've got a CO2 leak. So we didn't know what we had early on. And we had no idea it was CO2, which you won't smell, you won't see any of that. So fortunately, once we got closer, we could hear the leak. It sounded like a jet engine crash in your backyard. And our vehicle started, just spitting and sputtering. So we decided to go ahead and pop in air at that point. So we were dressed head to toe as if it was a fire, or natural gas, or whatever. We were covered. Me and my crew got there side by side, and we noticed coming in, it sounded like it was running kind of rough. Wasn't really wanting to run very well, and we were passing these cars that were sitting in the middle of the highway, headlights on, maybe the flash was going on some of them, doors open, some not open. Nobody around these vehicles. It was like they just vanished. So we continued on to the town. There was a deputy from Yazoo County that had started searching door to door. He had no protection on him. And finally he got in bad shape, just like everybody else was coming out of there. So we had to get him out of the hot zone to get medical treatment. was they're just laying there, vomit covered on the ground, waiting on the ambulance to get there. Come up on another vehicle on that gravel road. He said, "Have a vehicle?" I was like, "Yeah." You got victims. Like, I made the same face. I was like, "Uh-oh." And at that point, our vehicle was not running well at all. It was like just spitting and sputtering. And so we bailed out, and I told our driver, I was like, "Just go away. Go find somewhere this thing will run. Even if we have to bring them to you, drag them back to you, just don't let it die." So he did that. He got turned around. We started busting windows. Looking inside there, I didn't think they were alive. Just from outside the window, you could barely see any respirations. They were all slumped over the seat. All of them had foam coming out of their mouth. And you get to watch them more closely. They may have been breathing 6 times a minute, 8 times a minute, which is it's not good. Once we got them out and got them in ambulances, which was another ordeal in a rural community, getting multiple ambulances there. Most communities like that only have one. And once you fill it up, that's it. So we had some more coming from surrounding cities and counties. It was some type of CO2. Just everything was frozen.
It has been 5 days since a major gas leak in Yazoo County sent a whole town fleeing their homes.
Well, throughout the week, homes have been treated and virtually everyone is back in their homes, but the burden has not gone away.
12 News' Alex Love joins us in studio and explains how these folks are feeling.
One of the closest to Highway 3, the Douglas family home was hit hard by the carbon dioxide leak, but feels they were one of the last to get out.
My wife had brought the dogs out to use the bathroom before we go to bed. The dogs come back in, but she didn't come back in. She was laid up against the porch. She couldn't breathe. I got her in the house. I called the sheriff's department, and they told me we had a gas leak.
Though they didn't require treatment in the hospital, since moving back in Sunday, Larry and his wife have found themselves coughing frequently and ill.
Been sick in my stomach, can't eat, don't have no appetite, having headaches. We were sitting at the table eating supper the other night. I looked over at her, she had blood running down her nose.
While the company Denbury has shut off the pipe and begun the repair process, the Douglases and others have trouble settling back in, fearing an accident like this could happen again.
One of Africa's most bizarre natural disasters occurred on the 21st of August 1986 in a remote mountainous region of northwest Cameroon. It's estimated that between 1,700 to 2,000 people lost their lives. When outsiders entered the area after the disaster, they found whole villages full of corpses and pastures full of dead cattle. People had seemingly died where they stood or slept. The bodies of men, women and children lay sprawled in the roads or dead in their beds. The bodies showed no signs of physical trauma, and to compound the mystery, this tragedy occurred in a remote rural area. There seems to have been no explosion, no volcanic eruption, and with no industry using toxic materials anywhere nearby, it seemed a mystery as to what could have caused such deadly devastation. The answer lay in one of the strangest natural disasters to have happened in modern times. At 9:30 p.m. on August the 21st, 1986, a loud rumbling noise was heard coming from the lake. A huge bubble of water and carbon dioxide gas rose up from the bottom of the lake, sending a column of spray 100 metres into the air and sending a 25-metre high wave across the surface of the lake. At the same time, an estimated 1.2 million cubic metres of gas was released into the atmosphere. This gas cloud, being composed of carbon dioxide which is heavier than air, began to sink down, forming a layer 50 metres thick, which then flowed over the crater lip, down into the valley towards the surrounding villages. The effects were instantaneous and devastating. As the cloud flowed out from the lake at an estimated speed of 40 kilometres per hour, it suffocated every living thing in its path. People, cattle, wildlife, even insects were smothered. Nothing could escape the deadly cloud. There was nowhere to run, there was nowhere to hide. There was nothing anyone in the path of the cloud could do. The gas cloud passed through the villages of Nios, Cha, Kam and Subum, killing an estimated 1,700 to 2,000 men, women and children. Around 3,500 cattle, which is the main source of income for the villagers, were also killed. Incredibly, in the midst of all this death, there were one or two survivors. One of them described the moment that the disaster unfolded. I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way, very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I was there till 9 o'clock the next morning. A friend of mine came and knocked at my door. I was surprised to see that my trousers were red and had some stains like honey. I saw some starchy mess on my body. My arms had some wounds. I didn't really know how I got these wounds. I opened the door. I wanted to speak. My breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead. I went into my daughter's bed thinking that she was still sleeping. I slept until it was 4:30 in the afternoon. Then I managed to go over to my neighbours' houses. They were all dead. I decided to leave. I got on my motorcycle. As I rode through Nios, I didn't see any sign of any living thing. At a distance of 25 kilometres from the lake, the cloud began to dissipate, and some people were able to flee, although many suffering with symptoms of gas poisoning. Around 800 survivors were treated at the main hospital in Yaoundé. It was believed that many of the victims had been poisoned by a mixture of gases that included hydrogen and sulphur, although later doctors concluded that death had occurred from carbon dioxide asphyxiation.
In 2020,
Okay, this may not be working, but okay, so at Tarsha, first responders described the scene as chaotic. They said that persistent heavy rains drove, soil movement into the pipeline, causing axial stresses on the line. In some cases, you'll hear that it was a landslide, but I think it's more of a heavy rains driving just heavy soil into the pipeline, and it caused it to rupture. That really can happen just anywhere you put a pipeline. The problem with CO2 is that it's heavier than air. Natural gas, methane, propane, is much lighter than air. So it's going to rise up into the atmosphere. It's not going to collect at the surface where we all live. So that is the real problem. CO2 is just not a problem at the current 420 parts per million that is currently in the atmosphere. Although you've heard for the last many years from Al Gore on till now that CO2 is an existential threat to the world. It's the greatest problem that mankind faces. I think that's probably one of the greatest hoaxes perpetrated through the news media ever to be had. And I want to tell you that the scientists that I have been studying for the last 15 years, I'd say, are men with PhDs. It is their data. I think initially I ran into Dr. John Christie, University of Alabama at Huntsville, then Judith Curry. There was Richard Lindzen. There is now William Happer. He's a PhD out of Princeton. For some reason, I was just studying this many, many years ago. I was also looking at the comparative cost of energy. That was an interesting topic to me. But CO2 was something that I felt like was just really way overblown, and so you really have to delve into the science of it. And as a geologist, you're curious to know about Earth processes, and when you read that CO2 in the atmosphere is 420 parts per million, and from Dr. Patrick Moore, he's saying that it was 10 times higher than that in the days of the dinosaurs. So at 4,000 parts per million, it's really not a problem, but at 150,000 parts per million, which is about a 5% air concentration, it becomes a real problem. Now, when a pipeline ruptures, it is going to be an instantaneous concentration per the Exxon representative that I listened to just a couple of months ago there in Baton Rouge. It's not going to be some gradual growth of that amount of concentration. It's almost going to be immediate. So CO2 in pipelines, whether it's when you're transporting it, the problem is just about every pipeline gets moisture in it. So that moisture, that water, is going to create a carbonic acid, and it becomes very corrosive. Engineers, just about every engineer in the industry, as a geoscientist working with geology and geophysics, I also have to work with petroleum engineers of every sort, reservoir engineers, mechanical engineers, well planners. There's a science in every phase of this business you have to become familiar with. And that's what makes this business so interesting. And when you see a foreign or a counterfeit science that is telling the public that CO2 in the atmosphere, 420 parts per million, is a problem, I've got to step in and say, I'm sorry, where are you getting your data from? Because it's just not a problem. I don't know how many other scientists or earth scientists we have in the room, or if anybody's seen a presentation like this, but the data that I'm presenting to you is coming from those scientists that I've studied. So anybody that wants to debate that topic is really debating those gentlemen. So this President Carol Muffett from the Center of the International Environmental Law noted that CO2 behaves very different than natural gas in a pipeline. So it's in ways that make a CO2 rupture uniquely dangerous. I'm going to show you some pictures of those. She says because of the intense pressures, this may be a man, I don't know who Carol Muffett is, Carol can be feminine or masculine. Because of the intense pressures involved, explosive decompression of a CO2 pipeline releases more gas more quickly than an equivalent explosion in a gas pipeline, noted a report by CIEL and the Environmental Working Group. And even a modest rupture can spread freezing CO2 over a very wide area within seconds. In Delhi, Louisiana, that's Franklin, Madison counties, that was part of the Denbury line that came over from the Sartarsha area, was involved in an enhanced oil recovery project. Now that CO2 used in that particular nature is a good thing. I mean, it helps to circulate through a reservoir, and that's a known reservoir where you're circulating up and you're helping CO2 to release from the grains and come on back to the surface. That's fine. That's fine. But the proponents of CO2 capture and injection into plumes say that we've been doing this for 40 years, so what's the big problem? Well, there's several problems, and I have a comparison sheet I'll show you. The main points that I want to cover, though, that affected us right off the bat as an oil and gas company were stranded oil and gas minerals, because Denbury, now Exxon, wanted to come in and take over a well that was producing in the Austin Chalk in the Masters Creek field, part of which is in Rapides, Parish, and convert it into a CO2 injection well. And I later learned, because I read all the documents, I'm having much to do with the legal documents as well as the geoscience of what we do. They wanted to actually inject into 8,540 feet of sand. Now, if you do that, if you inject into that much sand, you're going to have to isolate every CO2 sand body that you inject into. Every one. Be very costly. So, from the state, I'm sure you can just imagine the regulations coming down from the Conservation Commission, that those regulations to isolate every CO2 zone is going to be a very burdensome regulation, and it's going to make otherwise drillable prospects undrillable, cost prohibitive. Then the safety issues became more evident to me about CO2 ruptures and drilling into a CO2 plume that's been created, and there's been many studies that I'll show you as to why both of those are a big issue. So contamination of your aquifers, your ponds, your natural springs, those are all very important to you. That would be important to me wherever you live. But you can imagine your area where you've got a nice, I think there's Cold Springs, that's further west of here, that's got natural springs rising to the surface. You just wouldn't want those to be contaminated. Maybe you have some. The economic feasibility of this, of CO2 projects, when we were approached by Denbury, it was more the landmen working with Denbury at the time said, look, just sign right here. I can't tell you about the proprietary nature of our work, but we promise you you'll make millions. And I said, well, what is the formula for making millions? I know what the formula is for getting rich with oil and gas. And if you bring a barrel of oil and gas to the surface and you sell it, it gets used right away, and it builds the gross domestic product. It creates jobs. It creates wealth. Where is the formula for putting CO2 into the ground at taxpayer expense? I don't know the answer to that. I think the only answer I can ever come up with is that specific companies that are big corporations that Melody referred to have the ability to have so many accountants on their team, dedicated accountants, to sell these tax credits, keep track of them, get the cash, it's sold for like 90 cents on the dollar, and use that money elsewhere. That's as best as I can come up with as an answer as to the money motivation for them. But it's very exclusive to them. We work with one of the larger independents, Hillcorp. Hillcorp, we've drilled different prospects with them, and Hillcorp has stated, we cannot figure out how to make money, with CO2 injection. It just seems like you're throwing good money after bad. And for most of them, that is the case. Except for the big corporations, if you can sell those credits and you want to take over Denbury's pipeline network, then I'm sure their accountants could tell you that we're going to make a lot of money on all of this nationwide. Well, that really disturbed me, because then it's true. When they threw eminent domain into the picture, we were just shocked. Because here we pay taxes on this property, we have property inside of an active producing unit, and if we don't sign right here and play along with it, then they're just going to take over the property? Well, our president didn't like that at all, so he was willing to go to bat against that. I think since that, then the legislature, thank God, has passed amendments to say that eminent domain cannot be used for pore space, but as all I know, and they made a lot of changes this past week, is that perhaps eminent domain is still available to pipelines. I don't know if that's true or not. Renee, would you say that's true or not?
I'll go over the wording that Representative Greg got sent me.
So the Representative Ghana and Chuck Owen, Danny McCormick are all guys that are fighting for landowners. Jacob Landry was fighting for landowners' rights. But unfortunately, Loga and Lamoga did not support that. Unfortunately, I can't say that the organizations that I wish were actually representing oil and gas, me and all the companies like me, would be more in support of our industry. But it's clear they are in support of CO2 and the big money that's backing them. Now, there's another issue about that. There's this grand authority granted to Conservation Commissioner where he's going to provide all guidance, but you can't hold him accountable. He becomes the assessor of mineral value. I don't know how that can be, because until now, it's been the free market. In other words, when we find a producing property and we have the ability to sell that producing property to another interested buyer, then the value of that property is determined by the number of buyers that you bring to the table in the free market world. But if you're going to be caught in under a CO2 plume and your reservoir is down below it, and you're one of a smaller group of people inside the unit, you may not have any say-so as to what value they're going to assess to your property. The commissioner, as it is written in the mineral code, as I understand it now, is going to be the one to assign that. I've never seen that in the 45 years that I've been doing business here in this industry. So the key differences back on enhanced oil recovery and carbon capture U.S. underground storage. Enhanced oil recovery circulates CO2 within a known reservoir size with definable boundaries. What I mean by that, you've got all these drill holes. You've got, say you have 10 wells in this reservoir and they're all producing. And some of them have water contacts, and those water contacts will tell you exactly where the edge of that reservoir is. Enhanced oil recovery aims to go exactly into that known reservoir and pull more oil up out of the ground. But with CCUS, or just carbon capture, when you're injecting large volumes of CO2 in sand deposits like Denbury wanted to do, they wanted to inject into an 8,540-foot vertical section of sand, which I'll show you, and you wouldn't know where that would go, and it's on monoclinal dip. So I'll show you that we actually went to the trouble to prove that it was on monoclinal dip. Monoclinal dip is just like this platform, this podium. It's just you get a piece of wood, you tilt it, that's monoclinal dip. It's just going up dip. You inject CO2 in sands on just straight dip going north, it's just going to go wherever it wants to. It'll find its own stopping place. The anticipated volumes of CO2 also injected over time far exceed those used for enhanced oil recovery projects. Reservoirs in enhanced oil recovery projects are also seismically surveyed, and they're pegged to the sand. So I don't know if any of you have seen a seismic line, but we go to a lot of trouble seismic comes to us in time. We have to convert that to depth, and we have to properly integrate that line to that well, or the well to the line. But with CCUS, you're going to have to drill who knows how many wells in order to find where your CO2 went. Because in the seismic world, CO2 may give you an amplitude, but you won't know that that amplitude is necessarily coming from the CO2 plume that you've created. You're going to have to drill a well to prove that CO2, you're going to have to drill a well to prove that that sand that you think you're in is actually tied to that seismic. Then only then can you really, beyond the shadow of a doubt, say, yeah, there's our plume. So it's very costly. Who's going to pay for all that? I don't understand the amount of expense that is going to be put into this, that's going to be required of these companies. Where is that money coming from? Why is that even profitable? My main concern is that they're going to cut a lot of corners. And they're not going to care where that CO2 goes. And they're going to say they know where it's going, but they won't really know. So the drill holes already exist. You're going to have to put multiple drill holes required. EOR is a financial enhancement. It definitely, like I said, when you bring a barrel of oil to the ground, you're creating more robust economy. You're adding to the GDP. CCUS utilizes taxpayer revenue and enhances nothing except Exxon's pocketbook. That's it. If they can sell the tax credits, that's it. Under EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery, predictable financial forecast. Because of what you're doing, you're paying a certain amount for the CO2 and you're getting so much oil out of the ground. But with what they're doing with CCUS, I am certain that the cost of operations is going to far exceed the tax credits. Then where is the money going to come from? EOR uses a standard lease form. CCUS uses eminent domain to capture your land. The cost to landowners, of course, when you create a plume, one of our main concerns going into it was just the cost and casing requirements. I've already mentioned that, the risk. If one incident occurs, where you drill into a plume and that CO2 enters the wellbore, and it really enters it kind of silently at first. It's not like taking a normal gas kick. And by a gas kick, when we plan a well, we plan it as just best we can, We take all the available information from all around that wellbore, and we say we're going to have to set pipe at these different locations. And we're going to have to use this weight of drilling mud to hold the formation back while we're drilling it. And while you're drilling it, you're going to liberate whatever gas you can, and it's going to come into the mud column, and it's going to back to the surface. Well, with CO2, when it comes into the mud column, you won't know it at first. You won't know it at first until maybe it gets up to the 800-foot level, and then it really comes up really quickly. That is what Noble Energy discovered, and that is one of the main concerns I have. This is how we got into it. This is just a map that I've made in Masters Creek Field. This is our area here where Denbury wanted to inject into 8,500 feet of sands. All these sands, this presentation is meant to go to the Secretary of Energy, just to show that this is on straight monoclinal dip. You're rising nearly 1,000 feet to the north. Pat Koregs came into Leesville and said that one way that you could possibly show the Conservation Commissioner that there should not be a CO2 plume created on your property is if you could show him that there was no CO2 storage ability below that property. Well, this is what we did. We bought tens of thousands of dollars of seismic data, mapped it up, and we will be speaking with the Secretary soon about that. I'll just run through this real quickly. So if you inject CO2 into the ground, and this is what really came to light just in the process of studying this just a few weeks ago. 35 to 55% of all wells studied have this problem with either casing integrity or cement integrity. Meaning that if CO2, if you're injecting into any of those sites that you see in blue, it can easily go up that annular space between the casing and the formation. If you don't have a good cement bond with the formation and with the casing, then you don't have a cement bond preventing gases from going up that borehole. Well, the studies that have been done, and this was Anthony Ingrafia doing a TEDx study of, what can a leaky well look like at the wellhead. Well, for us at Masters Creek Field, hunters found that there was bubbling at the casing, and it went unnoticed, but I don't know how many wells there are in that 60, 70 mile long Austin Chalk field that runs through Vernon Parish and some of Rapides Parish. But this particular study would show that after, if you just can tell that the graph on the bottom is years in time, and on the rising on the left side is the percentage of wells with casing problems. After just 5 years, I want to say that you've got 30% of all wells studied. This is not a small sampling of wells. This is a very large sampling of wells. And there's more than one study that is proving this to be the case. As many as 75,000 wells were studied in some of these studies. After 17 years, 58% of all wells had casing issues. How many wells do we have in Louisiana? These other graphs are just some of the other studies. I'll run through real quickly. Here's one from Cornell, 75,000 inspection violation records. These graphs show that any directionally drilled borehole versus a straight hole tend to have more problems with cement issues or just casing issues, mainly because the casing is sitting on the ground on the bottom and you can't get cement all the way around the casing, so they have to use centralizers to keep that casing off of the formation. It's not always successful. But this is pre-2009 and post-2009 data. In the post-2009 data in this study, 47% of all wells after just 300 weeks, that's in weeks. So who's the mathematician here? 300 weeks, is that
the 6 cubes.
Yes. So it's not very long in terms of the life of a CO2 plume. If you're going to leave a CO2 plume there indefinitely, and you've got cement failure, which is, from the observations from these studies, they say that it's ubiquitous, meaning it's just everywhere. Chronic and well-known model of loss of wellbore integrity. This is just a scanning electron microscope image of the cement sheath formation interface, and proving that there's fractures, and we all knew that. Of course, this is just proving it for you. The Louisiana Illuminator did a study of, well, how many different straws do we have that could leak CO2 back to the surface? They came up with 186,000 abandoned oil and gas wells, 4,500 are orphan wells. But what about all the wells in Louisiana, both active and abandoned? That total would be more like 420,000, as best I can tell. So you've got 400 to 450,000 times 50%. That would be your risk of a leak, of wells leaking. If you're going to inject CO2 and create a plume anywhere near other oil wells, then that's an issue. It's going to find its way back to the surface, possibly. That's the odds. Now, if anybody approached any project with any amount of awareness of the danger, and those were the odds, you just wouldn't do it in normal cases. I have mentioned this a couple of times to the state legislature. It almost doesn't seem to matter. What matters to them is just the amount of money that they think is going to be coming into the state creating jobs. It's disappointing to me because I had hoped that the science behind what we present would find a home in their brains, but it'll take a prayer to the Lord to change their minds, I think. This is from the Journal of Petroleum Technology, showing that it says, where will it go? This is a before and after of about a 1,200 acre plume that they created, showing the blue is where it actually went. The black dashed line is what was the planned CO2 plume reservoir. But this says that a critical challenge for those designing carbon dioxide storage sites is predicting where the injected gas will go. One of the only sure bets is to assume that any model of a gas plume that looks symmetrical is likely wrong. Okay, so this is one of our seismic lines, proprietary line to our company. When you inject it, there's really two ways. It's the faults that run back to the surface. I have seen amplitudes exist at the top of faults that don't go to the surface, and you just imagine what that is natural gas finding its way through that fault plane, acting as a channel until it finds a stopping point, and then it creates an amplitude on the seismic data. You can see that. So we know that if it goes, we know that faults act like channel or pathways, for gases to move up the fault planes if they're not sealing. This, I'm going to skip over this. I think we've already talked about the promised millions. I'll just say that any companies living or surviving on tax credits that are not Exxon or Denbury maybe, generally go bankrupt. That's holds for whether it's windmill or solar. If you don't have tax credits, and this may be in Spain or this may be wherever it is, if you're surviving on tax credits to make your business work or thrive, and those tax credits end, you're going to end up with a graveyard of windmills, near you. And they don't know, these are huge blades, by the way. They don't know what to do with those blades. Graveyards of blades around here. Listen, this happened a little north and east, I think, of Sulphur, around Beulah, if anybody knows what Beulah is. This was one morning early. A seal, some kind of a polyurethane seal, in this compressor station, it finally got eaten away by the acid, if we said, if there's any carbonic acid resulting inside of the pipeline over time, if it can corrode metal, it'll certainly corrode plastic. Well, that seal gave way and it let out this huge, volume of gas. Can everybody see how much gas it is crossing the road? Okay, so if you were in a vehicle driving early to work in the morning and you crossed through that plume, depending upon how broad it was, you could lose consciousness, you could lose control of the vehicle. This could be the end, maybe, of someone's life here. And that's been a big concern for us. So like I said, learning of the safety issues sort of began to trump the importance of stranded minerals. You really look at that and you feel like, I want to keep my family safe, and you don't want this on maybe your coveted horse farm. Via eminent domain, now the way I have read it, the way it stands now, unless they have changed this last week, and I don't know, but I was telling my good friend, veterinarian, who has several horses, I said, Richard, that horse farm of yours, where you love that property where your horses graze and you ride, you and I ride, on occasion, they have the right via eminent domain to come take that and use that property for one of these compressor stations. Now, I made this statement in the presence of several legislators, and I said, look, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Nobody corrected me. That is the way I read it. Hopefully it gets changed. Mike, that's something certainly to be worked on. I don't think anybody wants this on your site. That is what blew up in Beulah. The seal blew up. But if it's not the seal, it could be just the pipeline. It could just be the pipe itself. how does oil and gas affect, exploration? And the next thing I'll cover is just your aquifers. These parishes in blue, these are parishes with proposed Class 6 projects. Class 6 is those injection wells for CO2. And the little dots, would be where the wells are located. And you can see, I think, yes, up in North Rapides Parish, there is one. The big thing, though, is, and this is what I've read, and this part, I don't know that I can stand by, but I have read that there are over 200 applications, for these projects, these injection wells. To double check that, that is what I mentioned to Danny McCormick just last Thursday when he called me. He said, Brad, as far as I know, only 4 are going to be approved in any one given year. And I'm like, well, that's what you know now. But if they, like Melody says, suppose they decide to fast track those applications. My problem with this, y'all, is that these CO2 plumes are not small. They're not sticking CO2 into the ground, into a known reservoir. Instead, they're creating 18, 20,000, 30,000 acre CO2 plumes. If you just stick to 20,000 acres times 200 applications, that's 4 million government-controlled acres that used to be your private property. Now, if you are in here and you signed a participation agreement for that, maybe you thought you were going to make money, I'm here to tell you, I can't see how you're going to make money. I don't know how you're going to make money from it. I don't know the formula. As long as I've been at this, I haven't figured out what the formula is other than selling tax credits. That's the only thing I'm aware of, unless somebody else here can say, yeah, they can make money this way. If you could, more people would be doing it. There's a lot of people doing it, and there's big money backing it for sure, but it seems to be very exclusive to the major corporations. I don't know if you can see this. Okay, so you can certainly see the brown Denbury line running from Mississippi through Louisiana. But you may not be able to see the yellow triangles with the little exclamation point inside of that. Can you see that? Is that visible? Okay, so there's a number of them. All those are major CO2 pipeline leaks, 2010 to present. Okay? Now, also, after those leaks, you've got those parishes, those are the combination leaks in the parishes, and those long colored sections, Tuscaloosa Marine Shale, maybe the Eagleford, Austin Chalk, Deep Wilcox, those are touted as being exploration targets. So if you start creating CO2 plumes over there, you can imagine from my point of view, and we wanted to ever explore it through any of those, sand targets, we would have to cut through quite a bit of red tape, being all the regulations that would now exist, because you're having to drill through a CO2 plume. And you better be able to sell your investors on it. And this is what my main issue is with the legislators. I was telling them, please look, we're coming back, it's a very fragile industry coming back from the legacy lawsuit days, where attorneys go out and try to approach a lender, we can make you $200,000 fast if you just want to sign right here. Those are legacy lawsuits, like 300 of them at least or more that were in the state. So it drove investment dollars away from Louisiana because there were so many legacy lawsuits. Now we've got to deal with more potential lawsuits from the surface owner who wants to do CO2 and the mineral owner who wants to drill for oil and gas. Well, that's a conflict. You've created another conflict. But you've also created an issue of, do your investors want to pay the extra money to drill through a CO2 plume and spend all that cement squeeze efforts? 1 in 5 cement squeezes are successful. So the other 4 fail. That's a big issue for us because they're expensive, time consuming. Well cost, daily cost, mud cost, pump cost, everything that you're renting at the well site. If all you have in Louisiana remaining is, say, 200, 300,000, barrel type prospects or 5 BCF prospects, those just won't withstand the amount of extra money that you've got to pour into squeezing CO2 zones off. Now that's selfishly stated, just for the oil and gas industry. But what about y'all? What about the people? What about if those homes aren't really squeezed off to begin with, and that gas has found its way into your pond, your crawfish pond? There are studies as to what that will do to your crawfish pond, and I can get to some of those. Once again, if you're injecting into that well, it can find its way up that fault plane that goes to the surface. And if there's a crawfish pond nearby, let me tell you, there's Lake Dubuisson. Do y'all know where Lake Dubuisson is, heading back towards Opelousas? It's right off I-49. There's a state rest area there. You probably are more familiar with the state rest area. And it's a pretty big lake, and we've taken our boats out and had fun with the kids. That lake, as I understand it, is about 20 feet deep. I have checked that with my fish finder. And as I understand, the reason the lake stays about the level it does, it fills up when heavy rains come, but it's fed by spring water from below. Well, it's a nice fishing hole, right now when the water's right, and there's not too many jet skis out there, But suppose that becomes another Lake Neos, where your CO2 has found its way underneath Lake Dubuisson and into that lake. The reason I think Lake Neos all of a sudden gave way is because so much CO2 filled up at the bottom of the lake, and the pressure of the lake water was holding it down until the concentration got so high it broke the surface tension of the water and caused an explosion. Now that gas came out enormously heavy-duty concentration and killed a lot of people and animals. Not even crickets lived after that. When it comes to Louisiana aquifers, I've posted here the Chico Southern Hills, and there's another gentleman that's not here tonight. I wish he was here. He could speak to the Louisiana aquifers a little bit more. But these are all contour lines of all those aquifers, and you can imagine that wherever those plumes are created in southwest Louisiana and central Louisiana, those aquifers are in jeopardy because of what I am telling you. And I'm trying to express how important the one issue is that statistics show that just about half of all the wells over time, not over this year, next year, but over 15 years of time, are going to lose. It's an age-related degradation. Anybody over 50 understands what that means, So the semen is the same way. Over time, it's going to deteriorate, and it's going to quit doing the job that it was designed to do. And it's not going to be found until maybe a catastrophe happens. Semen cracks. And we proved that with those scanning electron images, didn't we? This is right up from the Denbury disaster at Delhi. I've already mentioned it. The two sheriffs involved with the two parishes had made some statements that it was a very major big deal, and you had to use a mask, otherwise you would just die. Pat Corregs with the state understands what happened here. I have not had a chance to visit with Pat. He's the communications director, but I would like to get more on this. I've had certain people tell me about it, but this was an enhanced oil recovery project. It was not for a plume. They were simply trying to recover oil, and some of those wells that I was just telling you about that have lost their semen integrity behind casing, well, the CO2 that they were using to get more oil out of the ground, it found its way into some of those wells, and it made its way back to the surface. And it caused a really big problem to where Denbury was fined about $4 million. But it really doesn't matter about the fine, does it? What really matters is, did it hurt anyone? How did it cause a problem maybe for the rest of your life over your land? You don't want that. You don't need that. These are in another state. This was just a model showing, and it was hard to get this model. They don't like to show this, but you can see that within 5 minutes, the amount of CO2 buildup can get to 50,000 parts per million. Well, 50,000 parts per million is really kind of low. Actually, what we were talking about at the rupture is more like 150,000 parts per million, so they're only going up to a third. Now, we were meeting in the lounge in Baton Rouge, and I asked the Exxon representative, in your opinion, how long will it take to get to 150,000 parts per million? He said, would that take 5 minutes? I said, no, instantaneously. And so there was a moment of transparency there with the Exxon representative, because until he said that, I really didn't know. But almost instantaneously, what CO2 is, it's not like carbon monoxide, which is starving for that extra oxygen. Carbon monoxide already has 2. Carbon dioxide already has 2. But it's heavy, and it just displaces the oxygen. Now, if your body, if it gets to be like, if you read, I don't know if you can read that chart, but at 100 to 150,000, dizziness, drowsiness, severe muscle twitching, unconsciousness, and the rest of it and above is death. This was Lake Neos. I think the video showed that clearly enough, and I've already talked about it. This next slide is how risky is it to drill through a CO2 plume. This was done by Noble Energy, and I've already kind of explained that when CO2 gets into the mud column, it's not necessarily recognized right away until it gets very close to the surface, and then it expands rapidly. That's the danger of it. And here it says at the top, it says, and if a well-controlled incident did occur, the gas circulated up the annulus would likely expand more significantly than a hydrocarbon kick. This problem occurred in Canada in the Weyburn field where CO2 was injected, and all the models said you're not going to have a problem. Okay, the computer risk models predicted that CO2 would never leak into either potable water zones closer to the surface or ground surface above the storage reservoir. Well, they did. The nearby farmers experienced foaming in a gravel pit, discoloration, hissing bubbles, carcasses of dead ducks, rabbits, goats, several gaseous explosions like what happened at Lake Neos, and zero investigation by the government. Now that I can see. That I can see. Because once the government makes these rules, and if the commissioner is the one calling the shots on how CO2 plumes are going to be created, how the gas is going to be injected, well, guess what? You cannot sue the commissioner. That's written in the Mineral Code. If you try to, you got to pay the attorney's fees. That doesn't work in our world. If we make a mistake in the oil and gas industry, when we drill a well, we make a mistake, we're sued, and we're going to have to pay for it. And I'll tell you that every company I've ever worked for in my 45 years, half of that's been offshore, half has been onshore. Worked for publicly traded companies as well as private. We have always cleaned up our messes that were created. So I was proud of the companies that I was with, that we did that. In this case, though, these farmers up in Canada weren't so lucky because it didn't. There was not any particular investigation by the government. Duke University came in, researchers reported that CO2 leakage would not only acidify groundwater, but mobilize heavy metals such as iron and zinc, and thereby contaminate local aquifers. Tests on water from the Kerr property have found high levels of acidity and heavy metals too. Stanford University geophysicist Mark Zoback challenged the viability of large-scale carbon cemeteries altogether. Lawsuits, yes. This is from Bradley Murchison. This was, I'll just run through this. It gets a little complicated. How dangerous is CO2 if we just leave it where it is? You've been told that at 420 parts per million, it's an existential threat. This graph on the right, where you see the Earth is being impacted by solar radiation, well, the Earth reflects that radiation back. And this amount of energy that is hitting the Earth and being released from the Earth is really measured in atomic metrics. It's huge. When you combine the total amount of energy impacting the Earth and what's being reflected back, it's enormous. Well, so Dr. John Christie put together a tug of war showing what's going up and what's coming down, and where does CO2 fall? It's all the way to the right. It's that little guy. This is like comparing a garden hose to a dozen fire hoses. CO2 Many of you probably already know that it makes up 0.04% of the atmosphere, and of all the contributions of CO2 to the atmosphere, it's not mankind's portion of that is just anywhere from 3% to 10%, depending upon who's counting. So we're not talking about 0.04, we're talking about 0.004. That's what we're trying to change on our planet. Well, there's a billion different ways that the Earth has of replenishing CO2 to the atmosphere. I wanted to, I'll just say that you can liken that to a 10,000 seat auditorium like in Lafayette where we have the Cajun Dome. It's about 10,000 seats. CO2 would take up 4 of the 10,000 seats. 4. Okay, if you're talking about mankind's contribution of CO2 to the atmosphere, now you're not even talking about not even one complete seat. That's how little we're arguing over. That's how much trouble we're going to with the legislature to try to control this, to keep our lives in check. So my statements to you on this matter come from all these various scientists that I have studied throughout time. One is most recently Professor Stephen E. Koonin. He was former Undersecretary for Science, U.S. Department of Energy under Barack Obama, nonetheless. His title is What Climate Science Tells Us and What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters. He knew that in all of these meetings, when scientists were meeting, they were coming up with very inconclusive evidence about just how much mankind, you've heard it stated as anthropogenic global warming, how much of that, can we control? And a lot of these scientists were very much on the fence about it. But what you heard is that there's a 97% consensus that all scientists believe that it's a problem. Well, not 100% of the scientists that I'm talking about believe that's ridiculous. Back in the days of the dinosaurs, CO2, of course, was 10 times greater. Dr. Patrick Moore showed that CO2 concentrations were as high as 10,000 parts per million. CO2, nurseries buy it, put it in their greenhouses, and then the plants get much greener. You go buy the plant, bring it home, and it doesn't look nearly as green as it used to because it was living in an environment with CO2 in it. You've heard that from a child. From the time you were in kindergarten or first grade. You breathe out CO2, the trees take it in, and in return they give you what? They give you oxygen, right? That's the way it works. The Earth has many, many sources of CO2. The oceans, for instance, have 50 times more CO2 residing in the oceans than on Earth. And they contribute a big portion of that to the atmosphere. When the oceans warm, they release CO2. When they cool, they absorb CO2. It's amazing that sort of steady or a ready state, I should say, of CO2's ability to be released and to be absorbed. This is a circulation of the ocean currents around our globe. This is the Atlantic, from the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. Multidecadal meaning, many years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The graph at the bottom is from 1860 all the way to 2020. What you can see here is a very steady warming when it gets red on top and a cooling when it comes down to the bottom. Then in 1920 to 1960, the oceans warm, and it really depends if you're in the Atlantic or the Pacific. It might be a warm water in the Atlantic but cool in the Pacific, and vice versa based upon the circulation. The cold water will sink down to the bottom. The warm water will rise. When you have warm water in the Pacific, generally that's going to mean you have a hotter summer in the United States of America, vice versa for Europe. What about, this particular study? This is where a quarter to half of the Earth's vegetated lands has shown significant greening over the last 35 years, largely due to rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Where does this come from? This comes from an international team of 32 authors from 24 institutions in 8 countries, which led the effort using NASA's moderate resolution imaging spectrometer, and they determined from this that the Earth is much greener. What about that area in North Africa, the Sahara? Why is that not greener? Well, just about depending upon who's counting, 6,500 years to 10,005 years ago, that looked vastly different when a sudden increase in monsoon rains transformed that region into a savanna-like environment, making it habitable for humans. Wildlife, fossil life can tell you what that particular portion of Africa was vastly different than it is today. The period of lush vegetation and plentiful water sources lasted for several thousand years before the climate shifted again, leading to the arid conditions we see today. Was that mankind's fault? Whose fault was that? Who can we penalize for that? We can't. It's just the way Mother Nature works on Earth. You can compare the amount of CO2 concentration during the same period that CO2 was sequestered. I'm not sure whether they were doing this. It's just two graphs from the carbon dioxide concentrations and from the Our World and data. But to me, it's just showing you that while someone was sequestering carbon, you were also increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide comes from, volcanoes. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is full of gaseous, on the oceanic crust, gaseous, fumes that are rising all the time. So that's all the sources of CO2 from the planet. They're numerous. It's just 100 million different ways. But listen, one of the main concerns that I presented to the state legislature was that in this country, in this state of ours, a landowner should never have to defend his property rights for an unproven science endeavor. And that is what Professor Stephen E. Kuhn will tell you, that there is no way that it has been shown that capturing carbon is going to lower the Earth's temperature. Drilling into an unanticipated CO2 plume, however, can be dangerous once those plumes are created. And detecting and managing it may not be so easy. There is a statement here in closing. To me, CO2 is a vital part of our atmosphere. We cannot bring, net zero. You've heard that term, net zero. This carbon, CO2 is part of life. It's part of every living thing. You just would not want to diminish CO2 to below even levels approaching 300. You want your Earth to be green. You don't want it to be cold, and without that, the real problem is when CO2 is injected into a plume that travels to unknown areas in an unknown destination, later drilled into, causing a catastrophe, or if they ship it into a pipeline and it cracks, maybe hurting your neighbors or you. Or the promised millions. Maybe you've been promised millions from the CO2. You should ask where the formula for those millions is located, because I can't locate it. If you find it, please give it to me. How likely is it that the commissioner will prohibit drilling through CO2 in the future once it's determined to be unsafe, thus forever stranding minerals, oil and gas, and destroying the landowner's mineral value? Lawsuits created by pitting the surface owner against the mineral owner will only drive away investment dollars. Leaky faults that travel to the surface will simply return CO2 to the atmosphere and possibly contaminate drinking water or ponds, as will poorly cemented orphan wells or active wells. In closing, this is a statement from Dr. Don Easterbrook, Professor Emeritus Geology at the University of Western Washington. It is impossible that mankind's contributions of CO2 could harm the Earth. It has not been shown that CO2 is a harmful greenhouse gas, or that removing any amount of the current 420 parts per million in the atmosphere will drop the average global temperature. And I want to drive home this last point. This is from Professor Emeritus Dr. Don Easterbrook. The Antarctica and Greenland ice cores have consistently illustrated that CO2 follows natural cyclical warming. That any increase in CO2 in the atmosphere is a result of, and not a cause of, Earth's natural warming processes. This paraphrase is from Dr. Don Easterbrook. He now has Alzheimer's. Otherwise, I would love to have gotten him here because I love listening to the man. I've listened to him for years, and he's got several books out. But fellow geologist, very smart man, who's presented some of the same data to his own state legislature. And there's an interview, here that people want those. Anybody that asks, I'll be certainly glad to share. But that is pretty much it, y'all. I have an appendix here that involves a lot of legal statements that I have to read and deal with, and they're changing all the time. And it creates a lot of work, to know how they're changing and just how it's going to affect me and you. But right now, I'll just open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask.
I'd like to ask y'all if you would just raise your hand, and let me see if I can find anybody who would come up and give me a hand here. Fancy, can you come help me? And we're going to bring the mics to you, so we ask you wait for us to bring the mic. And just raise your hand if you have a question.
Yes, sir.
That's a pretty straightforward question. This carbon that is being collected, brought in for sequestration, where's this carbon coming from? Is it from a big tower that's taking it out of the atmosphere, or is it pulling it up from the drilling companies that have been fracking with it?
They do have, like Denbury has CO2 that's found in a natural reservoir. And in these natural reservoirs, it's generally in a four-way closure, meaning from the top of the structure, it's dipping in all directions all the way from the apex of the structure. And so Denbury has it in a natural form, and when CO2 is found in the natural, it's usually in those kinds of closures that are four-way closures. If they could limit CO2 injection into those four-way closures, that wouldn't be such a bad thing, because they've been already doing that, But the problem is the way they're going about it. They're going about it by sticking it into monoclonal dip, multiple sands over thousands of feet that I don't know how you can track it. I don't know how you can propose a seismic survey large enough to really track where it's going to go. The other CO2 may come from factories where they can capture it, or they make these big, believe it or not, direct air capture systems that are big fans that suck it out of the air, which seem to be very expensive. They generally require oil and gas to run these fans, so there's issues with just how it's not carbon neutral at all. And they're trying to do the job of trees, just plant more trees. Because when you're running giant fans and you're sucking the total air out, you're going to have to separate the CO2 from that. The cost of that is anywhere from $200 to $600 a metric ton. The 45Q tax credit is only maybe $80. I think they want to drive it to $130. So still, it's not economical for them to do that. So how can they really make money doing that? And I've been asking that question for a long time, but I think the answer to that is just selling the tax credits at 90 cents on the dollar, and they use the cash on some other project. I hope that answers your question. You got a question?
I got one right here.
Yeah. What your chin, man? Let's see.
Who do we need to talk to about stopping this, or how can we do this?
How can we stop it?
Yes, sir.
It has to be more than just me. Look, I am a small number of oil and gas, active explorationists in South Louisiana. And it just so happens that I've got the guts to get up there in the legislature and say what I know, because I've studied it from these other men. I didn't know I would be up there doing what I'm doing. We got drawn into it because they wanted to take our land. And I happen to know already about CO2. It's ridiculous to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. I knew that already. So how can we stop it? It's going to take more than just me. It takes you speaking to your legislature, and trying to tell them what you have learned and that you don't want it. And they can't guarantee that when they inject it into the ground that it's not going to affect your aquifer or your streams or your ponds. That's the only way I know it's not.
You got some phone numbers?
Yeah, you go to the Louisiana representative, done that and spoken with Brett Guyman and Chuck Owen out of Vernon Parish, and of course Roland Hollins and I, he's from Allen Parish. We've made several of these, community trips because we do need your support. We're not asking for your money. I don't make any money doing this. I'm doing it because I believe that catastrophes are about to occur if we don't put a stop to this. It may not happen this year or next year or 2 years down the road, but it may happen after that plume has been in place for 15 years, when the wells that we have, it finds a well and it goes back to the surface.
Mr. LeBlanc, over here I have Mr. Sammy White.
Okay.
How are you doing? I'm Dr. Sammy Wyatt. I'm running for United States Senate against Bill Cassidy.
Uh-huh.
So just to let you know, I'm not a medical doctor. I earned a doctorate, my PhD in human resource education from Louisiana State University. I stand with you. I support you. I will stand against this carbon capture. And I promise you,
thank you.
My knees do not bend except for no one, except for the good Lord Jesus Christ. And I will stand firm against everyone else. I can promise you that. A little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Louisiana. I'm not from Chicago, like others. I am a graduate of Southwood High School in Shreveport, Louisiana. I earned my master's in business administration from Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana. Earned my PhD from LSU. Also, you want to know how all this is happening? You're not going to make money, but I promise you someone else is. Let me tell you that. And I'm going to tell you, I investigate fraud, waste, and abuse for a living. That's what I've done. I went into the United States Navy after high school. I graduated, I feel like I graduated in the military. And after I came out of the military, I started with the Bossier City Police Department for my law enforcement career. During that career, I served on the Special Weapons and Tactics team, and I also specialized in fraud, waste, and abuse, investigating fraud, waste, and abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. If you want to make money, you want to find out where your money's going, who's got special interests, follow the money, okay? I don't care if it's a politician, especially if it's a politician, okay? Follow the money. Look at whose friends are related to different bills. Look at whose relatives are related to different contributions or so-called 501c3s. Look at who's doing funding campaigns, funding different legislation. That's where you're going to find your stuff. As a certified fraud investigator, I can promise you I will be exposing any corruption. I don't care who it is. I have arrested police officers, preachers, teachers, youth ministers, public officials. It don't matter. I don't care who they are. If I find out they're corrupt, I will go against them. We'll make them public. And I did a video last night where I held up some handcuffs. I promise you that will be them. I will expose them.
I need to stop you.
Thank you.
This cannot become a political thing.
Thank you.
So it is. So I need you to have a seat.
We appreciate you, Dr. Sammy
I
Wyatt.
appreciate all your effort and all your work.
Yes, sir, over here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Fancy.
You're welcome.
Yes, I know
Here you
there's a
go.
couple people. Go ahead, you go.
Yes, ma'am. Or whoever.
Did you give this presentation to the whole state representative or just individuals?
I really spoke to a committee of I think it's about 20, 23 legislators in there, mostly Republicans. And they're all genuinely, I think, concerned. I think most of them realized when they passed eminent domain, they didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't know what they were signing. And they were fighting hard to get rid of it. I have submitted in an 11 by 17 written form to them, but I was not ever able to give them a video presentation like I'm giving to you of this PowerPoint. It's possible, I could speak with the entire legislature. I don't know if that's possible or not. I will tell you that representatives like Jacob Landry tried to get, reasonable, common sense amendments protecting landowners as well as oil and gas companies as part of the, bills that would reach the full vote of the legislature, and they didn't get out of committee. That's where I think that your support, your voicing, your concern is really going to help, because they need to know that you are concerned about what you've learned tonight, if this is the first time you've heard a study or a presentation like this. So I hope that answers your question. I have not had the opportunity to give this presentation to them, but I've made it to several communities like this.
That's a great presentation.
Thank you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm Daniel Deaton. I'm asking whether most of the carbon capture that the state is proposing or entertaining is taking carbon dioxide from the air, or is it the oil and gas people using it in their injection and then storing it?
No. I mean, it's kind of, some of it gets stored just by accident in the process of trying to get oil and gas out, or oil out of the ground. But that's a specific use of CO2. The amount of CO2 used in a recovery process pales in comparison to the anticipated amounts that they're going to be injecting into these plumes. It's just a very small amount, and it's used for business purposes to get oil and gas. In other words, in a liquid form, CO2 is about $30 a barrel. So if oil is at $60, $65 a barrel like it is today, and if they have the equipment to do it, in other words, the specialized equipment that it takes to resist corrosion, the corrosive nature of CO2, companies will use it, and it's used widely throughout the nation. But so your question is, where are they getting the CO2 from?
Where are they capturing it from? Are they capturing this
from direct air capture?
From the air? They do all of that?
Or from factories, like I think this, and I could be wrong. Look, it takes a lot of reading to understand all this, but I think that UNDOT plant that was going to be put maybe in St. Charles Parish, Mike or Roland, do you know about that plant? They're going to, have a foundry there where they're going to make their own car parts. Well, that's whatever they do to capture CO2 in the process from their own plant, they will be eligible for a tax credit for that. I'm okay with that.
But we need the carbon dioxide going to the trees so they can make the oxygen that we breathe. At some point, if you take it out in the air, we don't have air to breathe.
Yeah, but my thing is that you're going to have plenty of air to breathe. Dr. Mark Zappi from UL made the statement that, look, it can act as an asphyxiant. Well, it's disingenuous to say that. CO2, I wanted to ask Dr. Zappi if he was having trouble breathing. I don't think that's the case. If you're in an elevator with a dozen people overnight, you're going to run out of oxygen, you're going to replace that with CO2. So you're in a closed environment. But out in the atmosphere, the Earth has its way of balancing the CO2 that it is absorbing and giving you oxygen back in return.
Sure, so why do we need to mess with it?
My point exactly.
Money.
That's my point exactly.
Yeah, over here. Sir?
Hey. Oh, sorry.
Is there a named project that they're proposing at the Peppermill plant? Like, is it a named carbon capture project?
Yeah, CCS. You'll hear, it's often referred to as CCS. I think CCUS just adds the underground storage to it. So a lot of people refer to it as just carbon capture, sequestration, at this point.
And so is it going to have to go through permitting with like the...
Absolutely.
Okay, and so is there, like for us who would want to talk to a representative or a senator, or even somebody at the DEQ, like are there certain limits or certain things that we should ask about as far as water quality, air quality, these type things that we can say, how is this going to impact us?
If you try to bring the DEQ into it, Chuck Olin out of Vernon Parish wanted the DEQ to be in charge of this because he looked at CO2 as a waste product. It's really just a natural product in our atmosphere. It's not really a byproduct. It's a byproduct of maybe factories that are, and if they can develop some sort of a system to capture and make the certain folks feel more comfortable about it, fine. But when you realize that mankind's contribution of CO2 to the atmosphere is only like 3% to 10%, then you really are not so concerned about even refineries. But DEQ, if you call up there and you ask, can DEQ do such and such, they'll give you a very long answer as to why DEQ is not really in charge of that. I think that they're pushing to get this all under the control of one office, being the Department under the Secretary of Energy, Tyler Gray. You would have to speak with him, and then you'd have to speak with your representative, and you would have to speak with the governor any way you possibly could. You know.
Is this going to be tied to the blue methane plant that they're proposing there?
The blue hydrogen?
I thought it was methane or hydrogen, but anyway, that Beaver Lake renewable energy.
You know, that's a whole other issue. That's a whole other issue.
They're not tied together.
I mean, you do read things about $7 billion going to be spent on blue hydrogen, green hydrogen that come from different sources. But who knows, because they can make certain statements. In Texas, there was a carbon capture group that was going to bring all these jobs, spend $2 billion into the community, and before, I think a year or two went by, they were belly up. They were defunct. They were gone. Chuck Olin mentioned that, and you hear those statements, $7 billion are going to be spent here. Well, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see what you're going to do with it and how economical it is for you without taking my tax dollars to do it. If it's a viable business that you can create and it sells, then do it without tax credits or tax deductions, because I don't get any. We don't get those. Yes, sir, do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. First of all, it's been a very good program. And I live south of LSUA, and I'm really impressed with all these people here.
Yeah.
Can right now these companies use eminent domain and take our land?
Supposedly they have nixed the use of eminent domain for poor space, but I'm not sure about the pipelines yet. Last week a lot happened in the legislature, and the legislative session is closing this week. It's coming to an end this week.
Brett Diamond sent a statement for me to share.
Okay.
One of the things that I thought about was that, I was under the understanding that last week in the legislature that many of the bills, one of them, then the local parishes vote on the eminent domain was killed. Well, one thing we could do, if we could let them dig wells in the Capitol Gardens and leave them for about 5 years.
Yeah. They would love that, I'm sure. Yes, sir.
Well, your question about eminent domain led right into what I have to ask, is basically, I have some resources. If you need help in combating eminent domain, I didn't really catch all, I just heard eminent domain earlier in your speech and I didn't catch all of it. I have some resources that I can help with that.
Okay.
And that is both for private landowners combating eminent domain, as well as
see me after the meeting and I'll give you my card. Okay, thank you.
We do still have a couple of really great speakers that you do not want to miss, but I think we do have time for Mr. LeBlanc to have at least one more question, and then you can ask questions after your next speaker. I've got one over here. Candace, can you get to him?
Yeah.
So my question is, I live close to the Castor Plunge area where you talked about the proposed well being. Right next to that is the aquifer for Alexandria City Water, which you know affects about 80,000 people. So how do these companies get by without notifying the public that there's going to be a well so close to their drinking water?
You know, it's such a good question because it's very infuriating when you listen to some of the representatives who are in favor of carbon sequestration talk about notifying the public. It's so much up to you because it's maybe very obscure. Maybe Roland can answer that question better than I can. but, because he's a police juror for Allen Parish. Roland, you wanna answer her question about getting notified, like that they put notices in the paper? We get notification, as an oil and gas company, as an interested party in certain areas. But what about the public? I mean, they're an interested party as well. How do they get notified? Roland, do you want to tackle that? That's in Senate Bill 244?
You need the mic.
Yeah, you have to use a mic. Yeah. No? Oh,
thank you, Brad. Brad's really got so much information on this stuff. It's unbelievable that we've been able to team up without having to hire him because he cares about the industry and he cares about the communities. 244 bill come up the Senate bill come up, and that's what we question that bill because it's rechanging the way the department, the Natural Resource Department, is organized. Plus, that's the bill, if you looked at Facebook or if you looked at the news, where they was fixing to start metering people's water. If you reached a certain amount of water, that they was fixing to put meters on it, and it's like all the farmers, rice farmers, crawfish farmers, any business that used water was fixing to be metered. The reason why they was doing this is because of all this new economic development that they're talking about uses up so much water, like a data center. A data center, they say, is going to use 3 million gallons of water a day. And they're very concerned about all this economic growth. They were very concerned about how much water usage that they're going to be using. That's why I'm very worried about these, very, very concerned about these CO2 injections. Why I'm so concerned about these CO2 injections is because, folks, let me tell you what's more important than gold is water. Listen, you can have a place right here on this property and just say it's my place, and that value of that place is $50,000. You can go 1 mile down the road and my neighbor's place is worth $5 million. But what's the value of those two places if we mess up our water? They're the same. They become zero, right? Because listen, your water, this water, that's why they just did this bill, because let me tell you something about water. I've said countries has went to war over water and land. And that's the two things that we're facing with all this stuff about this CO2. Look, I had a whole lot of stuff to cover, but I really feel like I'm gonna miss some very important stuff if I don't go through this. But it's been lengthy, so I'm just gonna tell y'all from my heart about what we need to know. In Allen Parish, I was a police juryman from 1996 to 2012. I have a district where we got $1,000 a mile to work on roads and bridges. I wore out in 2012, decided not to run. I work in the oil and gas industry, love our industry, care for our industry, love what Louisiana means to the oil and gas industry and vice versa. But whenever one of them police jurymen come up to me about 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago now, and he went to telling me about these CO2 injections and what they was about to do and the millions and millions of dollars that we was about to receive in Allen Parish and the other parishes around with these CO2 injections, I said, okay. But I went to studying, I went to trying to get as much information about this stuff as possible. Because immediately I become alarmed whenever he told me they was talking about pumping millions and millions of tons of CO2 under our water aquifer. And that he said it's millions of dollars at minimum risk, And we can't stop it no way because they got eminent domain. That's when I decided to run this term, because I knew immediately it's not minimum risk. It's real risk. You know, when I would go and start meeting with these companies right at the beginning, when I would meet with them, they would take a can of Coke. I was going to bring a can of Coke tonight. I'm sure they won't be using it on y'all now that I've let the cat out of the bag. But they used to take that can of Coke and say, well, it's just like this can of Coke. So you're going to compare our community's future and our children's future and our water and all these dangerous pipelines that's going to be everywhere in our communities throughout our parishes to a can of Coke. They don't even drink Coke in front of me no more. But here's what I want to say. So I run for office. I begin to tell people in my district, think about this, y'all. What are we doing tonight right here in Rapides Parish with this many people coming out to try to find something out about this whenever that train is already in our backyard? Let me tell you something. The worst thing that can happen is that people not be informed. Let me tell you, when the decision makers started putting all this together, the most important piece to this whole puzzle that they left out is you and me and our communities. Look, we trust. Look, I'm not here trying to beat up on our governor and on our legislatures, on our local government guys. That's not what this is about. What this is about is what we tried to do. 4 parishes come together. Allen, Beauregard, Jeff Davis, and Vernon. 4 police juries come together, and we created the Louisiana CO2 Alliance. We went to other parishes. We couldn't get a lot of support. But then that's when we decided that we hired Miss Renee Savant. She worked for 3 governors, and she helps candidates run. You might want to talk to her. She's really good. But look, so we come together because I knew one thing. If we are going to push this train or try to derail this train that's already in our parish at 100 miles an hour, the only way we can do it is 2 ways: God and people, grassroots. What you see here tonight is the only thing that changes. God and people changes things that seems impossible to change. So we put this grassroots group together, and more people. I think we got like 5,300 followers, and we had like 1.6 million views in the last 90 days. So we slowly get the word out. But what we did, we started putting this grassroots movement, started getting with some legislatures, the pressure started being applied, and we put together some bills. We put together some bills, and some of the legislatures heard our concerns, put their bills, joined our bills together. Because, folks, the House Bill 4, Representative Owens put a bill together to give all 64 parishes the right to vote, up or down, if these things come in their parish. On April 29th, we lost that vote. Then we lost about 8 or 10 very important bills that day to protect your mineral rights. Listen, if that plume gets up underneath your property, and it's going to strand your minerals, it's your minerals, you know. And if we had bills that if it did get on there, that you was going to be fairly compensated. And also, there's been bills to mainly try to give the people an opportunity to say, you know what, we just don't want this here. There's some things money can't buy, you know. So I'm not here in Rapides Parish tonight to try to get to Rapides Parish. I would never impose my will upon another parish. But what I'm trying to say tonight is this: if they're going to force these things and they're not going to let us vote on it, I mean, maybe if we get enough people, maybe we will get another session and we will say, you know what, Rapides Parish, Allen Parish, Vernon Parish, we want to vote on this. You know, because let me tell you something, Baton Rouge and our legislatures and industry, billion-dollar corporations that don't even know our kids and grandkids' names should not determine how we live our future here. You know? So, let me tell you, we have put a lot of pressure with our little organization, our little grassroots movement in East Police German. We have put a lot of pressure in Baton Rouge down there. Not trying to beat up on these guys, but trying to get their attention and say, folks, slow down a minute and listen to the people that put you in office. Listen, there comes a time that, you know, we mostly, you know what, we never go down and bother our guys because we believe in them, and our ladies, we believe in them. We trust them. We have faith in them. We read parishes. We believe in what is right about America and about our freedoms. Let me tell you something. When you go to fooling with the most important thing to our communities is our God, our families, the protection of our water, and our land. And here we are with this train already in our parish, and here's the problem. The reason it's on top of us is because they stay quiet. Look at you know, but it ain't quiet no more because, listen, we are starting to make some headway. And, you know, we still got 2 or 3 little bills. I mean, we had about 10 important bills. And we have 2 or 3 that's still hanging in there. But one of them's very important. Ms. Renee's going to talk about this. It's about the eminent domain bill. We could not get, think about this, we could not get Republican support, enough Republican support, to do away with eminent domain 100%, folks. We couldn't get the support to protect your mental rights. We couldn't get the support that we needed to allow you to vote on it. But you know what? With meetings like this tonight, and our people that we have believed in, when they see, we're not trying to beat them up, but we demand to be able to have say how we live and about to protect our water and our homes and our future. You know what? And if we don't get that, you know what? I know how to vote no. And I know how to put other people in office if we have to. That's not what I want. But I will when it comes to my family, my land, and my water. Ms. Renee?
Hard act to follow, huh? I'm Renee Savant. I am the communications and grassroots strategist for the Louisiana CO2 Alliance. I've been labeled over the last 3 months as a lobbyist by the other side. I found out one thing. I wish I was a lobbyist. Those guys have so much power in Baton Rouge. They run Baton Rouge. Industry and lobbyists is running our state, not the people. The people are not running the state of Louisiana. We've lost control. 4 parishes came together. I got a phone call. I'm just like you. I'm a little homestead in Beauregard Parish. I grow a garden and raise chickens. And I walked away from Baton Rouge 20 years ago because it was so ugly. And I told God the day I walked away, I was on a Friday, and I served under 3 governors. I said, I'll never be back. And here I came back to fight this. And I said there was nothing that would bring me back to Baton Rouge but CCS and Mr. Roland Hollins made me come out from a little homestead and head back to Baton Rouge. And we had made some headways. Yes, we lost a bunch of bills. We went in, we walked in there trying to figure out, where the bathroom was in the section that we were presenting all our bills. And while we were in the House fighting for safety bills, fighting to move these pipelines away from our children from the schools, from the nursing homes, you know. Down the hall in the Senate, they were sneaking in, and I'm going to use the word sneaking in, Senate Bill 244. Senate Bill 244 is if you'll take a ream of copy paper and you take 4 of them. That's how big Senate Bill 244 is if you print out all the references. It's 219 pages, but if you print out the references, it's between 1,000 and 1,200 pages. Now, our legislators said why we're here in the predicament that we are today is because of Senate Bill 353 in 2020. And everybody voted and approved that bill, and it was during COVID. And now they're coming, and most of them will say that they didn't understand the bill, that they didn't understand what they were voting for. And some of them, I believe them. I mean, there are some good guys there. Gotta look for them. And Senate Bill 353 was 7 pages, and they didn't understand it. Every senator and every single House representative voted in favor of Senate Bill 353, those 7 pages that took our eminent domain away, that got us where we are today. Fast forward, guys, for 5 years they've been working on this in Baton Rouge. And while we're fighting these bills, they're down in the Senate, and they introduced this bill. And to say it is a bad bill is an understatement. It is a bad bill. I mean, I can't stand here at this pulpit, you know. But the thing about it is we are getting eminent domain taken care of. And how we're doing it and how they put eminent domain back in is through, in 2006, the citizens passed a constitution. It was Amendment 5, that our land could not be taken from us for 2 things. Our land cannot be taken from us for private use or for economic development. And so when Senate Bill 353 came and added eminent domain, they said that it was public use and they could take the land. So what Senate Bill 244 did just yesterday, it's coming back and it's bringing back our constitutional amendment that was put in place in 2006, and calling it what it is. This is for private gain and it's for economic development. And when it's used for private gain and economic development, they cannot use eminent domain against us. So how do you get involved? Go to Facebook, Louisiana CO2 Alliance. Follow us. We will be making a formal statement per State Representative Brett Guyman exactly what is, in the bill. But we try to share the bills. We try to share, what's going on. But we've been 4 parishes, and we would love to have Rapides and the citizens of Rapides be part of the Louisiana CO2 Alliance and follow us, and we'll support you and you support us. Thank you.
Give me about 3 or 4 more minutes, because that's what happens whenever you get to, when you get kind of kicked off. But here's what I wanted to say is that our first hope is that these 45Q tax credits in Washington need to go away, because it's a waste of our taxpayers' money. But no, so that was the first thing. The second thing was, if we could not, as a police juryman coming back, my view was this: try to get it to where the people can vote on it. Even though I knew it was going to be almost impossible with not a big crowd of people, not with a lot of people behind us, just just getting kicked up off the ground. I knew that was going to be hard to do, but it was my hope. It was my priority. Well, then my second goal was, as a police juryman, I got to be thinking about, as a granddaddy, as a father, as a neighbor and a friend, I got to be thinking about, okay, if I can't get it stopped, what we need to do to protect our communities. So that was the bills that we put together. Illinois is the first Class 6 well that's in the United States that we know about. It's already got 2 leaks. The company knew they had a leak, but didn't stop injecting. And then it had a second leak, and they had to stop and report it. Well, the legislature had to come back, the ones that allowed them to do it, the legislature had to come back and pass a bill this session that made them quit injecting in that aquifer. They can't even inject nowhere close to that aquifer. So we had a bill that we put forth that was for, because of that incident in Illinois. If a company come into Louisiana and had a leak, and they knew they had a leak, if they kept injecting and not reported, that it was going to be a felony charge on the CEO and the board of directors. That way they couldn't blame it on the operator in the field. You know, these are the kind of bills that we was asking for, just like the pipelines. We was asking for these pipelines to be, you know, 2 years ago, Mr. Mack tried to get these pipelines moved 2 miles away from hospitals, schools, nursing homes, communities, residents. Couldn't get it done. Couldn't get it out of Republican held committees. And then last year, or this year, I believe it was, he lost it, so he went to 2,500 feet. And still can't even get a 2,500 feet set back in these pipelines. Unless something changes between now and the next 2 or 3 days. But y'all, I ask you what you've seen tonight. Do you think 2,300 feet with these CO2 pipelines is far enough?
Nope.
Well, let me tell you what we did in Allen Parish, but I know that we are not legal. Is that we passed an ordinance that said that you can't put a CO2 pipeline by our schools, by our communities, by our residents for 2 miles. Knowing that the state and these guys and these companies can come in and take us to court and lose, but let me tell you something. We got to fight for our people. These things can't just run over our communities. But that accountability bill, we had bills, for instance, like if a CO2 pipeline leaked, or that notifications would go out immediately because it'd be monitors all up and down that pipeline. Monitors and phone calls immediately would be sent out into that community where there's harm's way headed their way. You know, these things that make sense. Our first responders with the right supplies and ability to get to our people. You know, all these things we've been fighting for just make sense, and it's right if they're going to force it. And we can't get it passed. We can't get these things passed. These companies, and I'm going to sit down, these companies sent us a flyer in Allen Parish that said, want to be your neighbors. Well, let me tell you this. After what we've seen them lobbyists do to us and our people down there in the last 2 months, they don't want to be our neighbors. And the last thing I'm going to say is this. If they come to here to lease, be sure to get a lawyer to look at your lease. Because when that first wave come in before I was elected, in the poorest part of my district, those people, when I realized what was going on, I went and started talking to them, but they had done signed a lease. Them companies had went through there and rented their leased their pore space, but they took their surface rights. Let me tell you something. Poor people that never use lawyers for nothing, these are poor folks. They took our people, my people's surface rights when they was just there for the pore space. And I've called the AG, I've had meetings, I brought people in to meet with the AG because of the fact the way this was done. I know that they were supposed to get a lawyer, and nobody should sign anything until you know what you're signing. But our people are poor, and they don't never go to lawyers for anything. So that's the last thing I'm going to tell you. Please share the word. If these leases start coming, please look out for your neighbors and your communities and the poor people and the people that might not know what's exactly is going on, and help them make sure that they're I can't imagine an old farmer, 60, 70, 80 years old, on his 40 acres he worked for all his life, he don't even own his surface right. Listen, I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all for your time. I want to thank these folks for doing what they've done. Mr. Mike, Miss Melanie. God bless Rapides Parish and keep us safe.
We're going to wrap this up with a local guy who has just been really in the trenches and digging and finding out information and helping us to get the information flow out. But before I turn it over to Brendan Dubrock, I wanted to draw your attention to this chart. I don't know if you've realized what this is. This chart shows where the old site of the International paper was. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is a 5-mile radius. I don't know if you can see that. Labuse, Willow Glen on this side and Lower 3rd, Latanya on this side. This is a 5, am I right about that? 5 mile? And then when you go out to here, it's 10 miles. The 10-mile radius is huge. And so we're being told that, a leak in a 10-mile radius, they call it a dead zone, or whatever that is. You might want to educate yourself more on that. But look how wide the 10-mile zone is. It's huge. Brendan, it's yours. Yeah. I think it encompasses every school in Rapides Parish and a nursing home and every hospital.
So my name is Brendan Dubrock. I'll give you a brief background on why I'm so involved in this. I did environmental work and partnered with DEQ on several Superfund sites across and around the state. My job was actually to go into plants and manufacturing, and I would pull samples and chemistry, and then I would bring them down to Lafayette to a lab and have analytics drawn on them so I knew how to dispose of them. Companies like Procter & Gamble is one of my clients. I worked all the way down to the Port of New Iberia, Lake Charles, all the way to, you guys remember the Guide plant that was in Monroe. They would find these barrels of waste, liquids, and they had no clue what was in them. And it was my job to wear a hazmat suit and go in there with a mask on because we didn't know what it was. And then my job was to come back, have the analytics on it, and I knew that if it was a flammable, I could actually send that to Denton, Texas, to a cement kiln, and certain chemicals I had to send to the ground. And it was heartbreaking for me because my whole life I've been a conservationist. But we have to dispose of this, right? I mean, there are certain chemicals out there that we need to get rid of. Then comes along the administration that brings forth 45Q. There was a tie vote in the U.S. Senate in 1922. Sounds old, right? It actually was in 2022. The Harris-Biden administration. 50 Republicans at that time voted no. We're not going to allow 45Q tax credits towards CCS. 50 Democrats voted yes. We want to have tax credits for CCS. In the Senate, who is the tying vote in the U.S. Senate? Kamala Harris. Why are the same Republicans and Democrats, our colleagues from the other side, now siding with this disaster of a plan that Trump called out, that Robert Kennedy has called out to be a scam? I want to implore you to please go look at the pipeline deception by Robert Kennedy. Vivek Ramaswamy has come out against this. It's all over the news. Trump last week, 2 weeks ago, just canceled $4 billion in tax credits for this. But why is our Louisiana delegation standing with this? Deception. Deception. Okay? I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not going to blame our representative or anybody here. Let me tell you something about a lobbyist. A lobbyist will go from one party to the next. It depends on who's in charge. They have no loyalty but to the gas companies. But there's one thing that I have and you have because you're here. Our love for our country and our passion for our state. So you're looking at the whistleblower. You're looking at the person that caused the rigmarole around the state. I'm coming clean. Why? Because my fellow Republicans have called me now a radical, left-wing Democrat. Because I didn't go with the flow. Because I know this is going to be a disaster. I've been in conservation for over 25 years, raising millions of dollars for wetlands and conservation, nationally, Canada, and mainly Louisiana. I've done multiple jobs with gas companies. Guess what, folks? We're all for gas. We're all for oil. And they're going to come in here and say, Brendan, you don't support oil and gas. Well, yes, I do. Absolutely. Well, there's a natural gas plant right there in Colleen. Yes, there is. Well, there's oil and gas. Your grandfather was oil and gas. Yes, my grandfather was a retired superintendent. And yes, let's not confuse CARB CCS with what they're doing with oil and gas. That is two different things. But they want to try to meander the two to confuse us. So I'm proud to stand up here and say, because I know who's listening. I know that this meeting is being recorded. And I was told that the governor will be listening to this. And I'm proud to stand here and say, I am a conservative Republican. One of the things that I want to bring to y'all's attention is, why the change? So, the program that was voted on in the U.S. Senate was intended to transfer tens, if not hundreds, of billions of dollars from taxpayers to industrial facilities, such as power plants, oil refineries, ethanol plants, chemical plants, a payment for capturing very large amounts of CO2. So, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that everybody noticed, which I'm happy to show, I wish you could pull that map back up. Did everybody notice the red dot in northeast Louisiana? That's Winsboro. I was sitting in Baton Rouge as a legislation assistant, jumping up and down, and waiting for 244 and waiting for House 4 to see if it would pass. Everybody wants to know what House Bill 4 was, right? It was the vote to allow it to go back to the 64 parishes for the people to have a vote. When that did not pass, and there was a split within our party. Landry stayed neutral. But whenever we had that split, and we didn't get a chance to vote, Rapides, LaSalle, Grant, the 64 parishes of our Louisiana, that's when I had enough.
Give us names.
No. It's easy. I'll give you the website. You can see how they voted. It's la.ledge.gov. You can watch everything live from your house and from your phone now. And that's what they're upset about, folks. Is people like me coming to you guys, giving out the information. They hate social media now. They hate me because I spread the wrong message. I'm sorry. I get 1.6 million views on my social media page by myself. I posted this across the state. New Orleans, Lake Charles, Monroe, Shreveport, Ruby Colleen, and that's when Mike and Melanie contacted me. And they were like, wait, what? Yeah. Why did I flip a switch? Because I thought we were going to do the right thing. I gave them a chance. So what can we do? What can we do? I want to tell you what we can do. Today, House Bill 601 merged with Senate Bill 36.
Not according to Brett Guyman.
He did change it, not to Higgins? Okay.
601 did not get tagged on.
It did not get tagged on 36. Golly. So, one of the things that I noticed today, this infuriates me. When I was watching the votes and I was watching the session, 601 was for eminent domain. They've already pushed this back twice? Once? Twice? 4? Yeah. I've lost count how many times eminent domain has been pushed back. Because guess what? Somebody woke up a sleeping giant. And the governor went to the Natural Resources Committee last week and he fussed at the Natural Resources Committee because guess what? All of a sudden, he has all these landowners calling his office from across the state. I'm not sorry about it. So, I grew up here. I'm a Dubrock from the Voles Parish. My grandfather was from Dubrock. My grandfather and my grandmother are members of the Daikata Indian Nation, and I'm the government relations director for my Indian tribe. I represent many tribes across Louisiana, and I've spoken with chiefs, and we're tired of being stepped on. And we're tired of you guys being stepped on. What's God's plan? What does God say to do? It's right there. Plant trees. My family farms 2,800 tillable acres. I was on my phone with him last night. He's like, Brendan, we have to have carbon for our corn and our soybeans to grow. Yep. Why do we want to put it in the ground and capture it? I said, because it's all about the money. So I have a question for Sungas, because there's some representatives here. We want you to come. But will you come if you cancel your CO2 carbon capture? Then we welcome you with arms wide open. Just don't capture carbon. Let it go into the atmosphere, like oil and gas has been doing for centuries. How can we reverse this? Guys, you're looking at a massive group from just right here in Ruby, Colleen, Deville, LaBouche, Holloway. I've got to have your help. They have to have your help. We have to bring in LaSalle, Grant, because what's going to connect Winsboro to over here? More pipelines. One of the natural disasters that happens in Louisiana about every year is hurricanes. This past year, I was part of a group, and we planted over 22,000 plants in black mangroves along coastal barrier islands. One of the next topics, I could talk politics and all this for a long time. Black mangroves captures more carbon than any other coastal plant. What do our barrier islands do for our insurance rates? If we were to build back Louisiana, and we ask these industries to go back and help us plant our barrier islands, guess what? We're going to capture carbon like they want. Amazing. God's plan. Number 2, why are we losing so much coastal wetlands? Because man created the Mississippi River levees. We are now doing a project where we open the Maurepas Swamp and we're going to introduce fresh water back into it. If you go to Laplace and you're going to New Orleans, you look to your right, that's Maurepas Swamp, and it is dying. We can't let man continue to destroy Earth, all for the dollar. When is it going to stop? We stood up and we fought as a nation. We won the popular vote. We got Trump elected. We got the vice president we wanted. We won the House, the Senate. We got the governor we wanted. And then we fall right back into 45Q? That the Democrats and the Republicans said no? But now all of a sudden, they whispers in the ear, we're going to bring jobs. And I'm going to point out Alan Parrish on this, and I'm sorry. They accepted a check from ExxonMobil for $100,000. Did y'all not?
School board.
The school board did. Now you're going to watch. They're going to come. Why do they choose rural communities? Because we want business. We want business. We need business. We need business for our kids. We need a business for our families. We don't want them to leave. Sell my soul to the devil? I'd rather keep my green grass. Sell my land? Actually, I'm not going to be able to sell my land because they're going to take my land. So what you have to watch for is this right here. You're going to watch a change in the vote. This is my predictions, and I've been pretty right about it. I'm going to take you back to the governor election of Eddie Rispone and John Bel Edwards. This is what's fascinating. I worked for Eddie Rispone's campaign for governor. Did y'all know that we had plans to bring a Tyson plant, a chicken plant, to the old International Government site? Y'all did. We could not get DOT and the state to agree to fix the railroad tracks. We were going to build farms here for our communities and have chicken farms, and they generate, guess what that does? It generates money for you, not the corporations that get these tax credits. That failed. But now all of a sudden, because this plant wants to come here, now the state's going to spend the money to fix the railroad tracks. I'm in tourism, and I've been in tourism for 18 years. And yes, I work for Lieutenant Governor. I was the U.S. Congressional District 6 coordinator, and now I'm a legislation assistant. Now these opinions are my own. They are not who I work for, and not who I work for part-time. These are Brendan Dubrock's opinions, but I'm a conservative, and I will stand up and fight for my state and protect it. I will protect it for my grandkids and their future. Leave Carbon alone. He just showed you everything that he had. I wish y'all could come see all of my research because it's the exact same thing, but he was very thorough with it. And I really kind of fall in line with legislation and laws and stuff like that. But my true passion is tourism. Who wants to come see a state that looks like a dump site? I'm going to tell you something. There's a study about Oxford and Stanford. No matter what they tell you, your land values will go down. But here's the good news. If you're outside that zone, your land values will increase 3 or 4%. Why? Because nobody wants to live in the dead zone. So the housing market struggles on the inside because everybody flees and then houses values on the outside go up. It's a disaster waiting to happen. I had a meeting with Mike Strain, our ag commissioner. I was in the forestry committee. Prices of food is going to go up 3.5%. Do you know what the strain that is going to be put on Americans? It's going to happen. Why did Trump put tariffs on Canada? Here's a big topic on their lumber. Because he wants us to use American lumber. So they're talking about putting up biomass. They're going to revitalize the loggers around here. Well, guess what? Trump's already working on that, but we have to wait for it. We're going to be making American wood again. Let's don't jump the gun on this. It all trickles down. One of the things I've learned is it trickles down to local government. Go talk to your Chamber of Commerce. Ask them their opinion on this. I've asked, what's the economic impact? What's it going to do? How much money is it going to generate for our schools? How much money is it going to generate for our parish? They can't tell me a number because it's so far off. They're not going to start building it until 2027. Oh my gosh, that's a year and a half. We're going to approve a project without the numbers? There's just so much in question. Now, there's parishes in Louisiana that want it, guys. We have to let them have what they want. The LNG plant in Cameron Parish wants it, but they're not going to pipeline it. They're going to actually put it in the ground. That's their responsibility. But whenever I saw that the parishes didn't have a voice, that hurt. Because there's only 4 permits filed. He was right about that. That was in my points. That was in my talking points. My buddy is the chief of staff, and I had a great conversation for an hour after the natural resources meeting. There are only 4 parishes, only 4 permits filed in the parish right now. But I want to bring your attention to something. Did y'all know that there is one project that's left off of the map, and I hope maybe it got killed? That's why it's off your map. It's called the direct air capture, provided by Heirloom Today, is going to bring a DAC, a direct air capture site, that will remove 320,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year in the northwestern part of the state. This facility will be located at the Port of Caddo, Bossier Parish, Treeport. It will create around 1,000 new clean energy jobs, powering Gulf Coast leadership in DAC. They're going to pull carbon from the air. This is what's alarming. The U.S. Department of Energy says it's eligible for a $600 million funding. Louisiana is possibly giving, says possibly. We gotta make sure that state clear, Well, we didn't say we were, we didn't say we weren't. $7 million. Who pays that? We do. We do. I love Louisiana, and I love our budget, and I love how we spend money. Do you know how much money we spend? And I'm for tourism, but do you know how much money was spent on the Crescent City Bridge in New Orleans? Did y'all see that pretty purple Mardi Gras colors, those LED lights? $20 million from the DOTD. $20 million for some lights. We've been asking for a Doge for a long time. So I'm not sorry for bringing it to everybody's attention, but I need y'all's help. They need your help. We now have to contact Senator Kennedy and Cassidy because they are elected officials that's in Senate. We have to get 45Q killed. We're not going to stop it. We're not going to stop it. Florida has come up against it. If you look at a map, what's amazing is every state that's for it, I'm going to give you a guess how they voted. Blue. Every state that's against it, even Texas. I talked to Wayne Christensen. He's a railroad commissioner in Texas. Come out against it. They are over environmental issues in Texas. Texas is a deep, rich oil state, right? They're against it. they're just going to store it in tanks and probably pump it off into the Gulf of America, which I'm like, sounds good to me. Better than it being in our ground. We have a long ways to go. This is not going to happen overnight. Y'all are doing a great job of coming here tonight and showing numbers. We have to realize this was under the administration before. It was Biden's administration and Harris, and it was also John Bill Edwards' administration that approved this. Unfortunately, the eminent domain did get passed in 2020, which we were fighting the pandemic and we had COVID. So there was a lot of misunderstanding from some of the laws. All I can say, guys, is just stay active. You know, and how can you get active on local level? If you're a conservative Republican, not a left-wing liberal like me, and you're a lady, I highly recommend you go join the Republican Women's Party. That's in Rapides. So you can keep up with bills like this. I'm there all the time. I'll be glad to talk to you. Men, you can join as an affiliate. So that's how you get active. We can't wait until, come on in. Oh, too late. Because our kids matter. Our kids matter. So you need to call your friends in LaSalle. You need to call your friends across the state of Louisiana. The only way we're going to stop this is if we unite and we make Governor Landry mad because he has so many landowners calling Baton Rouge. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brendan. And wow, it's been a very informative evening, and I hope that you've all learned a few things. Now, there was a question that came up, and I cannot remember the question. Is he still here? Well, anyway, I think that's it. Anybody else have anything else to say? Let's see what he has. Let's see what you got.
I'd really just like to point out why all of this wasn't in this piece of paper. I'd love to sign all of it.
Right, there is a signature, there is a petition signature in the cafe if you're interested in signing that. Thank you all for coming out tonight.